Welcome to the ePortfolio Stories from Down Under. My name's Alison Miller. I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of amazing people as part of ePortfolios Australia. I won't go into too much detail now about what that involves. We have a spot for that. And we're also collaborating with our peers in North America through and being part of the ABLE annual meeting. And again, we will share a little bit more about ABLE for those people that might not know so much about ABLE or ePortfolios Australia. But before we begin, the ePortfolios Australia Organising Committee would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and country, and extend that out to North America, traditional custodians or owners of lands. We pay our respect to the elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who might be here today. I know a lot of us know each other, but it would be really great if you could share through the chat, because not everybody knows everybody. So get the chat warmed up. So if you haven't already done so, please go right down the bottom where you'll find the little taskbar should pop up. Click on the little chat icon and share something about yourself. So I've given you a suggestion, a job title, a specialist area, location, maybe your organisation and LinkedIn profile, but that's really up to you. But yeah, maybe something that about yourself that you'd like to share with the group that can help them understand a little bit more about you as we go through today's session. I've pre-prepared mine, so I'm just going to pop mine straight into the chat. So I'll give people a moment to organise that. And it also gives us an idea of where people are coming from, the distance and the opportunities we have, even though we are quite at a distance. I think Michael and I might be the furthest west of who we've got in the room. Maybe I should check who we've got in the room again. There may be other people that I might have missed since they've come in the room. And then the furthest east going through, I would say it's Providence. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And everywhere in between there, which is fantastic. And really the power of technology for all its pros and cons. This is certainly one of the pros. So once you've had a chance to share information about yourself, please go back and have a quick flick through who else is in the room so that we can get a feel for the people, the amazing, incredible, I wrote them experience. We've got some very experienced people in the room and others that I'm really excited to be part of for the first time. So I'm looking forward to meeting new people, and as I hope you are as well. So what I might do is allow that to keep ticking over. So keep checking, going back, see if there's people that you haven't seen for a while or new opportunities for you to connect with people that you haven't connected with before. Kate Mitchell, yours came through as a direct message. So I'm going to put yours in the chat because Kate's traveling to a conference. This is what we do on the train. And so she's working from her mobile phone. Okay, so, oh, hang on. I'm using the wrong slides here. That's what I should have been using. These ones here, not the ones I've got on my slides. There we go, try again. So I'm just going to give a quick background. So I'm lucky enough to look after or work with the ePortfolios Australia Organising Committee, as well as what we call the ePortfolio community. So ePortfolios Australia is, I had it somewhere as a not-for-profit, but technically it's not even a not-for-profit. It's actually a true community of practice. So it evolved from existing projects. So there were some funded projects in the higher education sector in Australia, plus in our vocational education and training sector. We both had funded projects and we worked quite collaboratively together, which was really fantastic. And it just kind of happened at the same time in 2012 that funding fell away. We had actually established the title ePortfolios Australia just before the project's funding fell away, but the actual life of ePortfolios Australia really came into being in 2012 when we were supposed to run a full conference. So we had planned to run a full two-day conference. And then the funding was withdrawn and we didn't have the money to do that. And so we just let people know that the conference wouldn't be happening. But it so happened that one of our colleagues had actually booked a plane trip to Sydney, which is where the conference should have been held, and emailed me and said, can't we do something anyway? I've got a ticket here. Can't we just do something? And so we put it out through social media and emailed to the portfolio community that, would anybody be interested in, first of all, presenting something for the dates? Well, we could get it down to one day that we should have been together. And within about 5 or 6 weeks, we actually had formed a full program. I can't remember how many registrations, probably about 40 or 50 registrations. So from full conference being cancelled to actually running a full day and having speakers come from New Zealand as well to Sydney and across Australia, and having a full day program and about, I think, 40 or 50 people in a room was really amazing. And it just showed that there was a real kind of push behind, a real need behind the need for supporting ePortfolio practice. And then my memory is, and I don't know, Christine has never said that she doesn't have the same memory. The next morning we were having tea or coffee, or we were meeting with a colleague from the University of Canberra, and my memory was that Christina says, well, University of Canberra would be a great place and that to hold the what was then forget what we called it, wasn't the forum, the event next year. And that person said, oh yeah, okay, let me make some inquiries. And so from 2012 to 2024, we're now up to our 13th annual conference, which we now call ePortfolios Australia. And we've done a lot of other things in between there. So that's how we began, and we're still pretty strong, and we look forward to hopefully another 13 plus years together as well. I'm just going to pass over to Tracy Penny-Light, who's the president of ABLE, and let her give you a background about ABLE.
Hi there, I'm Tracy, and ABLE has been around for about 15 years. We're the Association for Authentic, Experiential, and Evidence-Based Learning, and we think of ourselves as the international community of practice as well, but also a full-fledged nonprofit here in the United States. And gosh, we've been, this was really the brainchild of Trent Batson, who came up with the idea for an organization that would bring folks together primarily in North America. And so we supported him and said, go for it, Trent. And so he created this great organization. We used to meet in, sort of tandem with campus technology, but then evolved to meeting on university campuses. And we're really excited to be here in Providence, Rhode Island, which of course is where Trent is based. But we're partnering this year with College Unbound. So we always partner with an institution, and College Unbound is really unique because they are an institution that doesn't have a physical space. So they meet their students where they're at, and reflection is a really huge part of what they do with their students. So really excited to be here, and thank you to everyone for organizing this great storytelling session today.
Thank you. So yeah, there's a similar sort of journey, isn't there? And as I said, collegial has been work together has been happening during that whole time, which is fantastic. It just shows that really there's no boundaries to where ePortfolio exists. So I'm going to hand it across to Professor Patsy Polly to give a background to how we come up with this, well, how Patsy came up with this session today.
Hi, Alison. Hi, everyone online. Thanks, Tracy, for that overview of ABLE, and also Alison for the historical perspective of ePortfolios Australia. And really, this session is about bringing people together, and what we like to do a lot in our Southern Hemisphere is come together in hybrid mode. It's a typical thing that we do, and I happen to be here in Providence. So I'm beaming to you from Providence, and the reason I'm here is really not only to learn again about ePortfolios and where we've come to in recent times, but to connect with community. And for me, this is very important. Okay, we've gone through a lot of reflective journeys in our own practice, but now having that sharing possibility of coming together and talking and telling our stories, I hope will give you a perspective of the timeframes that we've taken to come to this point. Now, I went to ABLE about 10 years ago in 2014. It's been a long time. And I met Kate Coleman, who'll be speaking before me, in 2012. So we've been ePort following for a while, actually. And we love it. It's a practice, a high impact practice that we believe in. And it's just fantastic to get everyone together to talk about their stories. So that's the purpose of this presentation session, and I hope you enjoy it. And I have taken over the hotel lobby at the Dean Hotel in Providence. So we are very flexible, everybody. Over to you, Alison.
So yeah, I think Patsy's words before, it's unbound. So I think it's really important that if we've got information to share and we want to learn from others, that we shouldn't be bound by where we're geographically located or what's happening. If we can come together, then come together in some sort of way. It might not be perfect. So sorry to the perfectionists in the room. It might not be perfect, but life's not perfect and learning's not perfect. So I think it replicates what we do naturally with our learning as well. I'm not going to take up any more time. This is our list of presenters for today, and that's the order of their presentations. I'd like to say that they are experienced and enthusiastic ePortfolio practitioners from Australia and New Zealand. For many of them, I have worked for more than a decade in terms of our community of practice, and I'm excited to actually work with some new people as well as meet some new people who are attending the event. So I'm going to hand it over in this order. So Catherine, Kate to us. Catherine, when you're ready, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand the proceedings over to our amazing presenters. So Kate, you let us know if there's anything you need.
I am good. Sharing okay? See Trent and Judy?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Thanks for having me. This is been a nice reflective journey to think about this story of ePortfolios, because I had this moment of realizing that I kind of live in a time warp where I don't make sense of time very often until something like this comes and you actually have to think about how long something has been. So I wanted to start the journey today. I'm just going to show it to you in pictures and then think about all the opportunities that came with, for me, spending a lot of time in airplanes to travel to this community, so that I could actually round out the kind of work I was doing. In 2008, I had begun a master's by research in e-learning and art education. And it's at that same time that as an artist and art educator, I discovered that there's a whole movement in the US around ePortfolios. And so I complete my master's by research in 2011. And in 2012, I actually began a PhD in ePortfolios in art education. And so during that time, I connect to a community, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And Still Down the Rabbit Hole is based on a presentation that I did at ePortfolios Australia in October 2012, having been at ABLE earlier in the year, and I'd been at ABLE the year before. So I will begin. I'm going to do this semi-fast as I take a trip through some images. So hello, everyone. I am Kate. I work at the University of Melbourne, and I'll tell the story as to why I work here and the impact that ABLE had on that, and my trip to Boston, and that actually changed my life. So from 2013 to 2020, I was a board member for ABLE, and it was a significant piece of work for me in Australia. I had taken over as a board member from Professor Beverly Oliver, who I worked directly for at the time. And I remember her walking out to the office at Deakin and telling everyone that I had replaced her. And she thought that it was terribly funny, and nobody actually understood what she was talking about because that group of people didn't know who ABLE were. And it was a really it was one of those moments when it kind of felt like an insider. There was a bunch of people that knew about this community on the other side of the world, and I had been able to somehow connect to them and found some incredible friends. So this is me with Susan and Trent and Judy. I think this is 2012, maybe 2013. Anyway, this is the beginning of the story. So make sure I can click. I wanted to show you some pictures that I've been going through collecting so I can tell you the story along the way. Because in 2011, I attend my first ABLE, and I also attend my first ePortfolios Australia. I go to Perth to Edith Cowan later that year. It's in October, ePortfolios Australia. I don't present at either of those conferences. It's a piece of research for me to actually think about what those communities of practice might mean for me in the job that I was doing at the University of New South Wales, where I had moved into a central learning and teaching team. And I was in a team responsible for rolling out ePortfolios. Because I had worked in ePortfolios, I completed my master's by research in that space. And I was using portfolios in my teaching practice at the art school. I was invited to come in to the central team and lead a very large project where I meet Patsy and a bunch of true believer, reflective folio thinking, folio practice people. And so we begin work there in Mahara. It's where I meet Christina. And I'm able to think in terms of whole university-wide assessment practice. And in that university-wide assessment practice, my connection to ePortfolios Australia and the work that the Office for Learning and Teaching project had done here, and the work that was being done in the US, I could pull together to draw those strings to think about how we might think about university-wide change. I had come out of a faculty position. And so from a faculty position using folios to teach with, because I'm in an art school and an artist, there was something that I actually understood. And I became more interested in the field because I realized that my version of folios as an artist, I used to call it being hijacked, but it was not necessarily always being understood because the portfolios were being very prescribed and sometimes really standardized. And then I started to meet people that were not doing that. They were actually thinking really broadly and with some possibility thinking and creativity around what the potential of portfolios might be. And they were the people that I chased, basically, to connect with them, to become more involved with them, and to think differently about what this might look like at the University of New South Wales. In 2012, I go back to Boston, this time to present. This is, I think this image at the bottom is in 2012. I go back to present and I actually meet Beverly, who catches me outside. Beverly had just become, she was, I think, the Pro-Vice Chancellor first at Deakin, and she was just about to become the Deputy Vice Chancellor academic. And she asked me if I might like to apply for a job in Melbourne. And so I think that's July 2012. By October 2012, I had moved and I was now living in another state, leading another ePortfolio project. And so I wanted to tell that story because the kind of stories from down under for me are not stories from down under. They are truly global stories around what the possibilities might be when people who are researching and practicing in similar spaces come together. And then what that kind of amplification of thinking and what that provides. So it actually gave me this opportunity to think differently. I talk about that conference as the time a conference changed my life, literally, from working on a great project at UNSW to being asked to come and live in another state and lead a university-wide project to think about ePortfolios again. And in 2013, Deakin joins the International Coalition of ePortfolio Research, and I begin traveling for 3 days, twice a year, to Washington, DC from Melbourne, to sit with like-minded ePortfolio people and lead the Deakin project, thinking about what ePortfolios look like. So, and when I've sat down this week to think about that, I think that's kind of crazy, but also totally unbelievable. And it's not the kind of opportunities that all academics get. even the, you know, come and work for me in another state kind of thing. But it was really unbelievable to be able to do. Beverly had been a big lead on the Office for Learning and Teaching project here when she was in Perth. And really that's the project that Alison was talking about, that for me, as I'm finishing my master's, really gives me the kind of information that I need around what this e-learning thing looked like at the time. And we don't use that term very much anymore, but it was something that had begun to really change the way that universities were thinking. Now 12 years, 13 years later, I kept thinking about it last night in its adolescent stage. And many of us think that things don't change. But if I think about these things, so this is, I think, Helen presenting in 2011 in my first visit around folio thinking. We now know those key books that Helen and Tracy and John and other colleagues wrote were key. But I also wanted to think about the opportunities that we did at ABLE around the open badge movement and the kind of work that we led into micro-credentialing. And so when we think about even the designs that I left at Deakin, which were all portfolio-led micro-credentials, that's the kind of work that a community of practice like this enables, which is this sharing and learning and developing with each other so that we can actually move the field. And everyone in that room, you know, moving the field together has been something that's been incredibly important for me. As I said, in 2017, I graduate with a PhD in e-portfolios. I get the joy of being able to speak to many people doing their research in e-portfolios from all over the world who contact me and say, hey, you did your PhD in e-portfolios. Can I actually talk about what that looks like? What that enabled for me in thinking was these 5 Ps that for me now lead my teaching. So I am here now at the University of Melbourne. I lead the Visual Art and Design Teacher Education program that only assesses in e-portfolios. We have 6 subjects across 2 years, and they do in that time 6 e-portfolios, each of them formative until they reach their final summative task. And all of the things I learned in each of these rooms, where people were generative, generous, and thinking really carefully about the kinds of opportunities that we had to think about what the work looked like. So for me in 2011, the International Journal of ePortfolio also launches and is a significant thinking space for me. I never actually published in that journal, and I don't publish about ePortfolios a lot. It's actually my practice. It's not my scholarship. And so I also think that that's an interesting conversation to have, that I was able to do when I went to ABLE conferences. I would talk about the impact on art education. I would think more broadly about pedagogical frameworks. And my research is actually about practice, how we come to understand practice. And I do write about practice and portfolios in teacher education, but it is a different version of the way that it's often referred to in higher education. I don't think about it as an assessment tool. I don't talk about it as a tool. I talk about it as these 5 Ps and what these 5 Ps actually enable in terms of the ways that we think about pedagogy and developing our pedagogical knowledge. And so teaching teachers to develop their pedagogical knowledge based on all of these experiences with these people have shaped the way that I now think about what this looks like. So I also wanted to just say that I think that one of the most important pieces of the network has been this professional learning community. The PLCs don't get talked a lot about in higher education. We use the COP language, but I don't believe that ePortfolios Australia or ABLE are COPs. I think that they are learning communities, and professional learning communities are purposeful. So this is just a definition from ISTE. There are many, but I think professional learning communities are incredibly important. And it's the work that in 2013, I worked with Judy and Trent to think about what the micro-credentials for the ePortfolio community might be. They have never come to life, but they are all drawn and planned, each with their own portfolio buckets, thinking about how we might actually use ABLE to issue micro-credentials to people based on their skills, because, you know, there's not Not everyone does their PhD in ePortfolios. Not everybody does their research in this space, but they work really hard. And in this professional learning community where we come together to share, it was one of the pieces of work that for me was a really significant piece of work that led back into the kinds of thinking we were doing in the coalition between 2013 and 2015. And you can still find that amazing paper. We were in cohort 7. The article that Sophie McKenzie and Kai Wilkinson and I at Deakin wrote was called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. And it was about this actual learning community. How do you actually take, you know, this kind of global understanding of what ePortfolios are and then put it in a university like Deakin and think about what the opportunities are when you track students across time. It was an amazing project because we took the PLC opportunity, placed it inside the university, and developed the micro-credential program internal to Deakin at the same time. Deakin is now world leading in its micro-credentials, and it came from these tiny bits of work about thinking about what it means to not just reflect on learning, but curate learning and demonstrate that learning in a different format, thinking about the ways that we connect artifacts, and when an artifact becomes a piece of evidence, how you make that claim for that evidence. And that story is, you know, can't be told without this broad connection of the people that I continuously photographed. Patsy, that's Jarlyn, who I took to ABLE first before I went with you. I think the last thing I kind of want to touch on in the ePortfolio space, for those who might be new to it, and for someone like me who has been around in it for a while, the way that the community worked to radically disrupt the way that we think about what leadership is means that you're not leading from the front, you're leading from the inside of a professional community. And so instead of the kind of big, grandiose leadership, the kind of big L version, which is, you know, you kind of come in and say that, you know, this is how it's going to be. This version was, to me, really courageous and creative and collaborative. And it let somebody, you know, who was doing their masters on the other side of the country come into a space and actually develop knowledge together. And in an environment like ePortfolios that are often challenging because they get a great big no straight away, or they have complaints around them because it actually takes work, and it takes really hard work to actually rethink assessment in a space that is standardized assessment. And so how do you disrupt, and using that, you know, good definition of digital disruption, because a digital disruption is a threshold, and once it's crossed, it doesn't go back. And to me, that radical shift in ePortfolios has enabled us to not go back. We've been able to think about what this now looks like, and those who choose to do the hard work and rethink what learning looks like and what learning feels like and how we actually show knowledge and develop knowledge, and not just have a transactional relationship with students. This is the kind of radical leadership that I've seen in the field. So last photo. This pushing at the boundaries of what constitutes learning, teaching, and assessment has been key. This is a workshop I ran, first workshop I ever run on designing badges in 2012. Now a long time ago. I think it's really interesting. We went to South by Southwest and presented in 2013. I think most of higher ed community is only just coming to grips with really the kind of big work that we had done at ABLE, and then with our broader community, with Mozilla, to think about what the opportunities were around micro-credentialing. They haven't gone the way many of us thought. They have become good versions of capitalism, but they pushed at the edges of what constitutes assessment, and we were able to think differently about how we might recognize what people already know, and maybe what they can add to that on top. That's me. Thanks for inviting me to share the journey of ePortfolios with you.
So brilliant presentation, Kate. Certainly, I've written a journey of opportunity and growth, which has changed your life, but it's also helped grow a network, which has helped to influence both your professional career, but also the places that you've worked, and changed, the thinking of what's possible. And if you know much about Kate's work at the University of Melbourne now, it is quite transformational, and her students absolutely love it. And also just that comment around, are we a community of practice or are we a professional learning community? So I think that's something for us at ePortfolios Australia to have a discussion about as we think about moving and thinking about our plans for 2025. So I'm going to move across now to Patsy, who you've already heard a little bit from already, for her reflections as part of the portfolio community. You're muted at the moment. The joys of working with technology, really.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Alison. Of course, the joys, as you said. Now the extra joy in trying to share screen. Let's see if I can pull it off. I'm not a Zoom user, but I guess everyone says that these days when they change platforms. So
It is. They move the buttons around, Patsy. That's what I find. Like so down the bottom, go right down the bottom. There should be a little green. Yep,
tricky people sharing. Okay, here we go. Can people see that?
Yeah.
There.
There we go. That's you've got your system.
Shit. Okay, from the beginning. Does this work now? My goodness, I'm here. All right, everyone. So I do apologize for the foot traffic in the lobby of the Dean Hotel, but when you're boundless, you get to experience the highlights of being in the traffic zone. Okay, so my name's Patsy Polly, and just to keep it interesting, I am a biomedical science researcher by trade, and I came into academia about 20 years ago. And I did what most academics do. I taught the content, especially scientific content. That's what we're comfortable with, right? And then I met Kate Coleman at the University of New South Wales a few years after I start, quite a few years actually. And she finds out about this assessment task that I've built, and interviews me for a toolkit called the Authentic Assessment Toolkit at the University of New South Wales. And from there on in, this relationship of learning began. And I thought I knew a lot. And then I was thrown into an academic landscape and I realized I didn't know anything. So I started to learn more about portfolios. First of all, I'm going to talk about this study in a series of chapters. I identified a problem. When I came into the University of New South Wales, I realized that students still had trouble communicating their science. So how was I going to elicit a behaviour that could enable students to reflect on their learning and write about it and be confident as science communicators? So the problem was coming back to this idea of graduate capabilities or graduate attributes. We all want our students to look like this, especially this triangulated form when they graduate from the University of New South Wales. This is our series of graduate attributes or capabilities. However, do students really understand that they're building these capabilities as they go through their process? Especially science students who are there really to learn the content, to train in lab techniques and then become lab scientists. However, their reflective practice needs work. And in fact, our own reflective practice as scientists needs work. So I started to reflect on what I knew and what I didn't know. And I learned from the very beginning again. So the issue was that these graduate attributes and capabilities are not explicitly addressed, and students needed to perform teamwork and communication activities, and they found these challenging. So the assessment design was authentic in that it asked students to research, to talk about their research as a team, and then write about it. However, they weren't very confident in reflecting on it. Now, when we use language like troubleshooting, scientists get to become more comfortable with that sort of language, problem solving, troubleshooting, this sort of language rather than reflection. So ePortfolios was a solution for the way I was teaching in my particular course that I was convening, and Kate illuminated the practice to me. The approach. We've all seen this before, but the idea of self-awareness and decision-making and transition learning were very important for ePortfolios working in a medical science course. So we started this process of reflective blogging, and students were asked to reflect on their teamwork skills and their research skills and communicate these skills and behaviours in reflective blogs. So I was funded along the way to do this, and tiny little pockets of money really go a long way in education, research, or societal. So I came out of this behaviour of capturing data in a lab, and then I decided to capture data in the classroom using portfolio pedagogies. And we started off with Kate in years 1 out to year 4 in the pathology discipline in which I teach. However, I started to then transition across many disciplines in medical science in third-year courses and try to align these teamwork and communication skills across various course settings. Okay, so the idea was that students would develop this narrative, this identity, and start talking about their skills rather than the content they were learning in these courses. So what started off as a course approach, for example, in my course, learning about teamwork and communicating this using ePortfolios and becoming ready for their professional world, developed into this concept of assessment tasks not only build skills, but also function as mini work experiences, especially authentic assessment tasks. And students started to shift their behaviour from dependent to independent learners to start to make sense of the content they were learning and the skills they were developing and how they could transition these out to their professional life after university. So the platforms, now Christina will love this because we started with Mahara, and this was the pilot that we worked within in second and third year courses. The problem with the ePortfolio implementation was really that we were working course by course and we were in a pilot setting with Mahara. This pilot was then taken away for various reasons. Usually things change at universities over time and we accept that. So what I decided to do was work in WordPress and develop this cross-disciplinary use in the medical sciences. So we still came back to the concept of course and assessment oriented in portfolios and then moved it a bit further into many courses, not only in medical science, but also within exercise physiology, optometry, vision science. So again, having platforms that were not there really for us to use in terms of a formal platform made us very savvy and made us come back to the concept of pedagogy. And the pedagogy is actually what is stable in this story. Okay, so I'm a big fan of keeping that pedagogy stable, and whatever changes we face, we can work around these. And Kate and I recently wrote a blog about whether AI can rock ePortfolio pedagogy. And we tend to think that it won't, because the pedagogy is stable in that it asks students to keep developing skills. It's iterative and it's deep learning, which results in deep doing. But you can read the blog to learn more about that. So the approach phase 2, here we go. We're turning an assessment task into something that's a doing task and then something that's a very much a thinking task, coming back to reflection. So I was forced to reflect as an academic, and so were my students in terms of the skills they were developing. Not only my students, but students across many different science program genres, okay, vision science, optometry, and so on. So the rationale was to implement reflective practice with ePortfolio pedagogy to incite this iterative, integrated and self-directed learning. Okay, so ask students to think along the way in terms of their professional skills, not knowing the content only for the exam. Again, just to bring in some interesting aspects of the work, we used a teamwork rubric that was provided to us by the value set of rubrics by the AAC&U. We modified this and added adaptability and negotiation, and also various levels of attainment to make this more truly for our students and our academics, actually. Again, reflection was very important. We asked students to think about how they were evaluating one another with this rubric and how they were developing their own skills. So there was a system that we had developed with scaffolded content. So we found that as a reflective tool, ePortfolio that was coupled to assessment tasks that build authentic skills, improve student capabilities and teamwork skills development. Okay. We also saw things like students were not able to respond to conflict as judged by metrics that were attained from that rubric. However, this is an area that needs more work, and we believe this is more a concept of the maturity and the stage that the student is at rather than the actual assessment task. The approach, moving on to phase 3. We went a bit further and talked about the idea of development of badges. Now, I won't show you the badges because they're very much in development still, but the idea of extracting data from that teamwork rubric to sit behind a badge that told the story of skills capability development. So the rubric becomes a series of metadata that sits behind the badge, but the student talks about that data in a reflective blog, not the actual data itself, but the actual journey that they've taken to develop the skill. So here we are again. This is a process. Students are prompted, they reflect. We also developed a reflective rubric to help the academics mark the student work. So there was a lot of work that came out of something that just started as a reflective blog, okay, in one course. It then became an ecosystem of students reflecting according to the skills they were developing based on these mini work experiences, let's call them that, delivered as authentic assessment tasks. So the outcomes, we had a standardized system of embedded portfolio pedagogy, professional skills, and career awareness for future graduate employability for our university students. So chapter 6 comes back to the idea of consistent ePortfolio pedagogy. There are our students as triangulated form of who they are when they graduate. But how do we incite and enable the behaviour of reflective practice and enable these graduate capabilities and attributes? I come back to the idea of reflection and reflective blogs. Okay. We did compare the effects, and we also found that there was an identity development, which was very important. So the uncomfort zone as a scientist, I wrote about this in an article for the AEPR in 2017, but it's about not knowing the expectation process, being exposed for personal thinking. Us scientists hate the idea of reflection. And in fact, I was very uncomfortable as an academic when I started at the university, and I got better at it when I started to reflect. So we needed to change the language, and I mentioned this earlier. We had to make it discipline specific. In other words, asking students to understand the meaning of what they were developing, to develop this idea of critical thinking of their work and reflecting on outcomes. This is actually what we as professional scientists need. So they became comfortable again. And we did this by addressing the uncomfort zone issue. Reflective practice helped us. We integrated it with authentic tasks. So you can see the build-up from one course out to many courses, and the whole idea of students reflecting all the way through their degree programs. They were comfortable again. Everything came together like Lego, However, it was an iterative process. It's not just knowing something for the exam. It is hard work. It is ongoing, and that's what ePortfolio pedagogy is about. Okay, it is a series of workstations that come together to make a story. So as part of that, we struggled marking these reflective rubrics, so we developed one ourselves. And it was a tough time, actually, because we had to ask our examiners to learn how to use these types of rubrics. So that was fun, but also it became intuitive after a while as we developed a process for reflection. So in conclusion, students were able to do this. We helped them with a series of prompt questions, but they became professional in their thinking as undergraduates. We've published this. We've talked about it a lot in various reports back to our funding agents and agencies. We've had ethics across it. We've published the work. And now we're at the point where we have a university-wide need. So we were thinking about this in and out for many years. I've stayed true and I believe in ePortfolio pedagogy and practice. So it's funny, things come in and out of fashion, and I think the ePortfolio pedagogy and practice is one of those things. So now we've identified that we need an ePortfolio at the university. So thank goodness, because I've been talking about this for a good 10 years at least. And the whole idea is to visualize these graduate attributes, but also build up these reflective practice behaviours. That's the roadmap that we were thinking about as we came across a group of EF or education-focused academics that were funded with an EF fellowship to work on this across the university, came up with a roadmap to elicit the idea of reflective practitioners as graduates and keep them thinking about where they could head. Now, this is not rocket science to our audience, right? We've all talked about readiness in some way or another, but to convince the university to implement a portfolio is hard work. So you have to have many types of approaches that suit many types of disciplines, and that's where we're at the moment. So that's me in a nutshell, everybody. It has been a big journey, not only for my students, but also for the people that I've been working with, and me indeed, it has been huge. So getting to know everyone in our community in Australia and New Zealand, as well as North America, has been the greatest joy, and I think has helped me get better at what I do, and has created a new professional identity for me too, as academic rather than just research scientist. And I don't like to use the word just, but that whole practice was foundational in helping me get here as well. So thank you for your ears and your time. Thanks.
As you can see, Patsy's not shy to a challenge. She's running a webinar and her own presentation from the foyer of her hotel room. So there's no, if you want something done, Patsy's your person to get it done. But what I took from that, Patsy, is that you have the challenge of trying to support the broader educational learning needs of your students beyond their actual discipline, and that you took on an approach that has certainly been embedded through what you do in your own course, but now going across your university. And so a couple of things. One is around the ePortfolio practice, that the pedagogy is stable, so the process remains the same. And what we know is that the product or the actual platform will change, but the process will stay the same and have different forms within that. So that's the good consistency there. And I love that you are able to produce self-directed learners who could demonstrate themselves beyond their discipline. So it's an amazing journey, and we're very grateful, one, you've been on it, and two, that you've shared that with us. So thank you so much. So we're going to move on to Mandia and Wendy. So when you're ready, Mandia and Wendy, please let us know if you need any help moving across to, no, you look like you're seasoned Zoomers.
Oh, kia ora, folk. Can you see our slides and hear us all okay? Fantastic.
Yes, looking good.
So thank you for the invitation, Christina, to present. And I thought we'd start. I'm Mandia Mentis, my colleague Wendy Hollybone. We're from this beautiful city of Auckland, which is the city of sails in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The city of sails, the picture there is the waka, or the ship, which is kind of key in our programs, a key metaphor in our programs, but it's also key in the context within which we work. And right at the top there, one of the indigenous whakatauki, or sayings or proverbs here in Aotearoa, is that one at the top. And I thought it was really fitting for this presentation, that we walk backwards into the future with our eyes fixed on the past. And this presentation, as you've all said, is kind of a bit of a reflecting back to see where we've come in terms of our e-portfolio development, where we are now, and what endures into the future. So our short 10 minutes, what we thought we'd do is just situate our journey of e-portfolios in the context of both our country and our disciplines, and then talk about, as you folk have already alluded to, the two key things is the technology and the pedagogy. And what we thought we might do in the short time is just single out what has endured in the technology, that what are the affordances that have endured to enable us to use the pedagogy that we know is so effective, which many of you have spoken about already. So our history then begins, and I think I'm right, Christina, it was when Mahara was first created, which I think is round about 2006. But that's where we began. So we began with the first iteration of Mahara. Wendy and I are both educational psychologists, and that was the program that we started, using portfolios and Mahara e-portfolios. It quickly grew into other professional programs. So we teach and we supported the speech language therapy program, initial teacher education, and the program we work in mostly now is called specialist teaching, which is experienced teachers who then go out and become resource teachers for children of all kinds of learning needs, blind and low vision, deaf and hard of hearing, advisors of deaf children, behavior disorders, and so on. These programs are all taught in blended mode across the whole country. So our context is Aotearoa, it's national. And Mahara, or e-portfolios, have been an incredibly valuable tool to enable us to do a variety of things with these professional programs. We started out using them just as a real shift in pedagogy to a different form of assignment, where the assignment is them creating and putting in artifacts to evidence their learning, but in very unique ways, because we know that our students come to us with very different past experiences. They're located in very different parts of the country. The contexts within which they work are very different. So we needed assessment tools that would enable them to reflect this authentic growth of learning and practice. So it was a shift to a new form of assignment. But more than that, it grew into things like our students using their portfolios for their own ongoing accreditation, their ongoing continued competence that they had to evidence to their professional boards. So as psychologists, we have to ongoing demonstrate how we are continuing our learning and demonstrating competence in the field. They took their initial portfolios, which we used as assessment, and they continued to use them in their own purposes, for their continued competence, for their accreditation, for their appraisal meetings with their seniors once they'd left the program. So these tools, the affordance of this tool, gave them the ability to then use this as a repository, as a documentation for their ongoing lifelong journey of continued learning. One student, I remember, came back and said that she got her job because she'd used her portfolio as her ECV, and the employer was so impressed by her use of the portfolio in this way that she got her job. So assignments, accreditation, continued competence, it just becomes a tool for our students to use. We equip them with that knowledge in using the technology, aligned with a particular kind of pedagogy, very similar to what you outlined, Patsy, in terms of critical thinkers, authentic learning, different evidences of practice to navigate their journey. We then moved it into a PhD, and many of the PhDs that we supervise now are using portfolios, e-portfolios, as both their workspace and their showcase. So they're keeping it in terms of their workspace as a messy place where they sort through what they need to do, but also a showcase of the mahi that they've done. So what is the technology then? And what is its affordances that allow the kind of pedagogy? And we thought in the short time that we've got, we'd just focus on maybe one thing in technology and then show you one growth in terms of, or one example in terms of the pedagogy. So I'll talk quickly to the technology. Right from the very beginning, we began with this concept, this metaphor of Mahara being like a museum whereby you could showcase, as you do in a museum or gallery, your understanding of your mahi, of your work. You could exhibit. So that, as you all know, if you use Mahara, that basement down the bottom for us was key for students. And I think the affordances of that are really key because you can put any kind of artifact, multimedia artifact, down into, we call it, down into your basement, that you can then bring up into your portfolio in multiple different collections of pages. So multiple different portfolios. And that, I think, was key for us, that affordance of Mahara, to enable you to only put it once down below, but you can use it, reflect back to it in your assignment, your ECV, your accreditation. Many of our students also use it as a repository to share with their people that they work with, the teachers that they work with. So putting stuff into the bottom as your storeroom for us was really important as the first step. And then, as we say, bringing them up. So the second step of creating your page, which you then link to your collection. We gave them the metaphor of, just as in an art gallery, you would have a collection of work that you'd walk through the rooms. That became a useful metaphor for them. And I think the affordances of that enable us to use those multimedia methods of using it. And then the final thing, you know, the green dot there where you allow people entry into your portfolio. So the affordance of Mahara of giving you a secret URL, which for our professional programs was really important. We needed it to be password protected in a space where only one link would allow you access to it. And then we encourage our students to kill that link afterwards. And that becomes their space. They own their work. And we talk to them about our assessments as being our privilege of dipping in to validate the good mahi, the good work that they do for a period of time, and then we move out. So the ownership is theirs, of their work, of their artifacts, and how they evidence their learning around it. And then, Christina, you took that over, and we were very excited to see that becoming one of the metaphors on the International Mahara site of how to use the technology. But we feel the affordances of Mahara, we've never looked back, and it's now become a platform that the whole university at Massey use, particularly for professional programs. It lends itself so well to it. But I'll hand over to Wendy now, and she can walk you through some of the pedagogy. Oh, sorry, before I do, just summarizing some of those points I said, the importance of the affordances of the technology, that it's password protected, multiple purposes that they can use it for with a single artifact. We really enjoy the continuation of it being multimedia. Our students, as we said, are able to give us we have very large classes at postgrad level, so 400 students online, so their ability to give us a little video intro of themselves enables you to engage with them in a way that other assignments wouldn't. So the multimedia is really important, and then that diversity, because they all produce a completely different assignment, which is their understanding, their evidence of their learning according to their needs and interests and context. All of them are fundamentally different, and Mahara allows us to do that, and the flexibility of that. So Wendy will talk a bit more about the pedagogy there.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Wendy. Thank you for this opportunity. As you said, Kate, as you said, Patsy, one of the most useful things of being invited to share today was reflecting back on 2 decades of thinking about how the technology and the pedagogy co-influenced each other over time. And it's just been really nice to think about when it was that we'd reach out to Christina and ask for a new affordance to fit our pedagogy, and when we'd see a new affordance in the technology that allowed us to do something slightly differently. So Mandy has told you a little bit about our program. Some of the key kaupapa, or the way we do things around here, is the emphasis on self-directed learning. So 400 practitioners up and down the country serving very different professional groups, serving very different contexts, and being able to choose from content, being able to curate it in the ways that suit them and their communities, and to be able to store all of that in their portfolios. Then that notion of learning with, from, and about. So we have 400 practitioners across 8 specialist areas. And so one of the key things is figuring out how these platforms enable them to learn with each other, from each other, and about one another in order to serve our children across the country as effectively as they can in a community of practice, as you already talked about, Kate. The idea of digital storytelling and being able to pull these multimedia artifacts into a portfolio, but then curate them, tell the story of why am I including this? What does it show in terms of my ongoing competency, in terms of my reflective practice, in terms of my growth and impact? And how do I do that using Mahara and all the tools? When is an audio the best? When is it screenshots? When is it a video? And then lastly, what we've moved to in the last couple of years, and we'd like to show you a real example, is how can we move to more collaborative portfolios, both as the collaborative workspace behind the scenes, and then as the collaborative showcase for assignments, but even more than that, to give back to the communities we serve in various ways. And so I'll just stop sharing that, and I'm going to show you, we have permission from one group of our students to show you their actual collective portfolio, which we thought you might find interesting. So New Zealand is a small, long, skinny country, and it has 12 sort of sub areas. This is a group of professionals that are in their year 2 of the postgraduate study. And they're working in a group of about 25. And what they were charged for in this course, which we called community-based practice, is going out and together across these 8 specialist areas, thinking about what are the unique characteristics of this part of Auckland? What are the strengths? What are the needs? And mostly in our education discourse, and especially in the challenging times we all find each other in now, what are the stories we're not hearing? So how can we work together to gather those stories, pedagogy, and then how can we capture those in really meaningful, collaborative, collective ways through a Mahara e-portfolio? So these are the groups, and you can see that some of the people chose to work individually, and then some chose to work in a collective space. All of them had access to one shared collection. This is a collection where they could see each other's pages. So even if one of them was working on their own, they were still dipping in to see what others were doing, and then how together they could respond authentically to the needs of Auckland and this part of Auckland. But we'll just show you quickly this group of 6. Their interest in this community-based storying was looking at stand downs or suspensions, expulsions, and how that was affecting learners, primary school kids, especially in this area. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what they did, but mostly how Mahara helped them to story what they did. So text, obviously, they could tell a nice story about how the 6 of them worked together, what they did to go out and find those voices from their community, how they worked together. And this was messy. You're seeing the final product, but when it was still a workspace, you could go in at any time. You could see how it was evolving, how they were each contributing, and how they were drawing on those other stories from other people to help figure out their perspective. They captured things in nice narratives, and of course that's not a surprise, and they hyperlinked everything because Mahara lets you use it as a lifelong resource, so those hyperlinks were important. And then they used the different blocks really effectively to be able to story their journey well. So when they did surveys, they went out and said, we need to hear the voices of certain groups, and they captured those in documents, and then they pulled together their thematic analysis, each of them for the benefit of everyone else in their group, through these these really lovely mind maps, audio, visual. Each of them took a different slice of this bigger issue of engagement and how suspension and expulsion was affecting it. And then each of them used the affordances of Mahara to upskill one another and then to come up with something together that they would give to their community. So you can just see each of them. It brings, one of the nice things about the technology was how much they could personalize it. You can really feel the different flavor of each person's approach in how they gathered the evidence, how they storied the evidence, how they shared it with one another. And then if I keep going, what they needed to do was work together to come up with a big visualization where they all said across all of the stories we collected in this area, here's the meta themes. And then here is what we as a group of educators can do about it. So they presented these in sort of knowledge visualizations or these posters, and then moving back from sort of showcase to workspace, figured out what they as a group of 6 could do about this for their community. So this was something that they engaged in as a group of 6. They engaged with each other as the group of 25 in this area. And then they looked across from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island to find community commonalities across all of the professionals. So yeah, just a really nice marriage of kind of the technology and the pedagogy. And now I'm just going to switch back to the presentation. So I hope that helped to see the self-directed aspects. It was their topics and their areas, and it was done in the ways they thought were most impactful. It was done with, for, and about each other in the communities of practice that'll last long beyond when they graduate from us. It enabled that multimedia storytelling in really powerful ways that then they can share back with their communities. And it was inherently collaborative, but also focused on being done with and for their local area. And lastly, we just want to say thank you to Christina for the 2 decades of support and innovation and yeah, just ongoing challenge and support, and to the whole Mahara team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mandia and Wendy, for your sharing your story there. So again, I'll just do a quick summary of my takings from that. And it sounded like you needed to come up with a way to change the way that to collect evidence for different learners, different educational needs, different learner needs in different context. And you use the analogy of the museum as having that basement and then creating these collections. Professor Beverly Oliver, who Kate Coleman spoke about earlier, had a similar analogy around wardrobes and identities. And so you have a wardrobe, you put whole different lots of items in there, you never wear them all at the same time, and you bring them out for different types of identities or different types of situations that you have. So I'm going to borrow your museum analogy as well. And then that the technology, I love that there was this symbiosis between the technology and the pedagogy, and that technology allowed the learners for the educators to have a window in terms of the learning journey itself, but not only the educators to have that as they were building their portfolios, but also that as that community of learners that they could actually tap in and see what was happening. And so you were building this community of learners as the whole learning process was going. So an incredible journey, and thank you so much for sharing with us. So moving on. Christine Slade, could you, yep, beautiful. I love it. Time perfectly. Thank you.
Oh, thanks everybody. I have a little different story, I guess, about e-portfolios, and I've titled what I want to reflect on advocating portfolio pedagogies at an institutional level, and probably wider than that as well. So this is a picture of our campus in the city of Brisbane. It's a very beautiful historic venue, and so it's very lovely to work in. But I'll go back a little bit from there first. So I've just created a few slides of things that have been touch points for me of reflection over a period of 12 years. And this is the first university that I worked at, which is up the Sunshine Coast, so about 2 hours above Brisbane, which has the most, it's doing its thing, where it actually, beautiful beaches, a lot of people from around the world come to live. Anyway, they have a small university there. It's growing all the time, but compared to where I am now, which 55,000 students, it had about 10. And they were very interested in e-portfolios. And you can see there, this happened in 2012, and it went right through to the beginning of 16. And all of those parts there, I was responsible for looking at e-portfolios as a tool and a pedagogical platform for the university, and we went through all of these stages and actually implemented university-wide. So this was my first experience of actually being in e-portfolios, and that's why I was at the, whatever it was called, forum in 2012. I remember sitting at ACU in Sydney, and it was such a wonderful experience where people shared with me the good and the bad and the ugly of what they were doing in e-portfolios. And I was very grateful for actually hearing these stories to help me make better decision-making of what I was going to do. Now I'm actually at, a more complicated university, the University of Queensland, so one of our sandstone places. And you can see, I just picked this slide because you can see what they were planning to get out of their e-portfolio. It's a much more complex system. They were looking for things for students, as everyone's talked about, for, you know, their own reflection and, you know, employability and that, but they were also looking for things that for the university as well. And so they were in a very complex space. And we have an enterprise system, but we also have some other types of systems being used as well. What I want to share about is my key areas of reflection is about advocacy. So I've spent a lot of my time over the last 12 years talking to people about why portfolio pedagogies are a benefit for learning. And I easily grasped that concept just as much as I did experiential learning, active learning and that, but other people don't seem to see what I see. And so it's been easy for me to actually advocate for it because I totally believe that that is true. But, you know, institutions can move very slowly. They can have all sorts of constraints. And so therefore we seem to be constantly advocating in both my roles at the university, even though I'm not in charge now of e-portfolios as such. I do have quite an influence on what actually happens with them from a pedagogical point of view. I guess the other thing that I've taken on from right at the beginning was connecting my practice with research. So I could say pretty much everything that we've done across those years has been researched in the form of a practice connection to research, not perhaps so much theoretical, which maybe we need as well, but I've always tried to record what things we actually did that were innovative or, you know, a different case study of the practice. And the other night when I was looking at this, I actually counted up that I'd written more than and presented more than 60 times with this research sort of idea. And the other part of it is collaboration. And I'll show a few examples of what that's meant, maybe with one person. I love working with professional staff, learning designers and others and helping them develop their skills in e-portfolio practice and research. I've ended up being on international collaborations now for quite a long time, but I guess that's a very special part of it is wherever you go and whatever you do, you have conversation that you can talk about the benefits of collaboration in e-portfolio space. And I've managed to be at ABLE once, I think, in person, and of course been at most of the forums. I think I missed one because I was graduating with my PhD, but I've pretty well been to everything else. This is the first touch point I wanted to talk about, and it's a really old paper now, but at the time at the Sunshine Coast when we were trying to pick a platform, so in Australia we tend to have enterprise systems rather than every course choosing their own sort of portfolio, though now we are encouraging that a little bit more. And nobody had written about what were the criteria people were looking for in using a portfolio. So we did a needs analysis as part of our feasibility study, and we just picked Mahara and PebblePad, because they were really the only two options in a way that we had in Australia at the time. And I remember submitting this to the journal and the editor saying, why haven't you, analysed all these others that in North America that people use? And we're like, well, actually, they're not really available as enterprise systems to us. And this was the first time. So Keith was our IT guru who was learning rapidly about pedagogies. And I remember sitting with him, I'd come into the office and he'd be sitting there trying to write his part of the paper, and he did up his charts and everything. And it was so lovely to see him learning more about pedagogies, and he just kind of embraced it. And so that, I guess, was a special moment, because other people then used this paper to try and help, at least, if not picking whatever system, the criteria for what they might need to do with those systems. So it was, I thought, a useful paper for the sector. Then another touch point with me was in 2016 in the forum, and I had just started at the University of Queensland, and lo and behold, wasn't Gillian Hallam actually working there as well? And I wouldn't let it go. I used to have her for coffee and say, come on, we need to write something about the history of portfolios and what you think is, happening now and for the future. And for you, all of you who don't know Gillian, that her works are still actually under the QUT repository, and she did a couple of big projects for the Teaching and Learning National Grant Scheme on e-portfolios. So she was in digital technologies, but she did this massive project of looking at university students' use of e-portfolios, about policy and practice. So she worked more on, I guess, universities having the upper end of the policy framework. And then she also was the one who actually worked on having a sustainable community of practice, and that's partly where all of this has emerged from. So it was lovely to share with her at the forum, and we wrote a paper about it. And then did a presentation, and this is a few of the slides. And this is like quite a long time ago, but if you look at the middle slide, challenges of implication, is still kind of the same. The university saying we don't have money, we're not that interested, or they're in change now, trying to manage AI, etc. Trying to manage cultural shift in universities is always difficult and takes quite a lot of change. And that's what we were saying then, and I guess that's still what we're saying. But the ideas we had for the future is coming about in the sense of, now we have lots of blended learning because we didn't know about COVID then, and bring your own device. The ideas that Trent Batson had about, learner-centered work, authenticity and assessment. At that time in 16, we were really looking at also about the workplace and what Patsy was talking about with graduate attributes, and how can we encourage people in the workplace to actually use portfolios and prepare our students. And I think that still is something that we need to work with. And so the question at the end was, how can e-portfolios respond to current challenges in education and employment? And that's very relevant now, and I'll talk about another couple of examples as to why I think that's so in 2024. In 2017, I was working a lot. I was the assessment lead at the university's central unit, and academic integrity really hit the screen in Australia, because in the public press, a contract cheating site, so SA Mill site, was reported, and they demonstrated how all students from approximately 10 universities use these sites to buy their assignments, and higher education here went into a bit of shock, because we actually didn't know that was happening at that sort of scale. And so we entered probably my work for the last 8 years. Part of my work has been trying to address some of these problems. And I wrote a paper just for the forum, a short paper on my reflections about that, as to why I thought e-portfolios could help manage this problem. And a lot of it was around, what we know to be common aspects of portfolios, being able to measure what students are doing over time. We can see their completion over time. They have to check in with the educator. We value the learning process as well as the outputs is a really important one. So all the things that we were learning about contract cheating and how to actually manage or tighten our assessment or be able to identify it are sitting in an e-portfolio. You know, to this day, I don't think anybody, they're just starting to get it. I could see it back then, but really nobody sort of picked that up too much. But now when we've come to generative AI, people are saying, well, you know, portfolios and the way they are harnessed is a way we could actually manage generative AI, because it's the same sort of thing. If you're looking at the negative side of generative AI, we can see the same things happening there. We can monitor the students, we can scaffold what they're learning and everything. So it's sort of coming back as a way in the solutions to being something of importance. And I think that's an opportunity for us. The other thing that I would say there is there's a push in Australia at the coming again through various things about programmatic assessment. So instead of looking just at units or courses, a lot of universities are now starting to say we need to go back to looking at programmatic assessment. Again, an opportunity for us as ePortfolio people to say we can help you with that. I've had some other interesting collaborations. So this one was with educators in Southeast Asia, and that was a real eye-opener for me, because in Australia we have so much enterprise systems and people like it or they don't like it or they have problems with it or whatever. But over with these people, they didn't have any of that. They have no money for an enterprise system. And Dr. Mantana Tamat actually won a grant, and she did an amazing job of developing a portfolio for these educators across about 9 countries. And she asked myself and colleagues, Shari Balka, who I work with, she's a learning designer in ePortfolios, and my colleague Christine Brown-Wilson, who's a professor at Queen's University Belfast, to do 4 professional development workshops with these people online. And it was an amazing experience. They were so hungry to learn about portfolios. We got to hear about how they used free tools and the types of things that they were doing with it. And it broadened our perspective to say, you know, I guess now we encourage people to use whatever tool suits them for what they want to do with their students. Another big collaboration came out of the ePortfolio professional learning community or community of practice, and that was exploring the ePortfolio practice in health and education. And it was around, this was our beginning of the digital ethics conversation, which I know, and I'll talk about, ABLE has the task force. So at the same time that in North America people were thinking about these problems with digital ethics, we were also having the same conversation. And it's just interesting there, and Bernie's name's there, and other people that you might know, and Alison, and this was the people who were in this project. And there was no funding, it was all collaborative. It was hard at times, and we had fantastic leadership with Misty, but we managed to actually do this research project where we looked at what students were saying and staff were saying around the problems with digital ethics. And it was just quite amazing to have so many people from different places working together. And then probably one of the last things that I'll share about is the fact that I've been on the ABLE task force for digital ethics in ePortfolios now for 5 years. We've done 5 years work. And the picture of the people there is just 1 year, changes somewhat, but that's about the same number of people that are on this task force. And every year I've tried to, for a long time I was the only Australian on it, Christina was there from New Zealand, but I've tried to bring the practice of what we were learning from there to the ePortfolio Forum. And I've worked with colleagues across the task force from North America and Christina from New Zealand to write papers for the forum to keep everybody up to date. But there's some amazing work being done there with the different versions of the digital ethics principles and how the scenarios and resources, I mean, it was a fantastic and huge piece of work. And it's been quite a privilege actually to learn from people and see different perspectives from different countries of what we do. And the last bit over there, which has it's a paper for the upcoming ePortfolio Forum next month. But I wanted to share that because in the last 2 years, maybe 3 of the task force, we've been decided to do a research project. Again, no money, but a collaboration of people who want to know what is a snapshot of current practice across North America, and also Christina and I got involved with the Australian and New Zealand survey as well. And we want to know what people are doing, but we also wanted to know around the principle of visibility of labour and how people are acknowledged for their work. And so the North American survey, they're doing up a lovely work at the moment on how to report that and what they found. And we adapted the survey to Australia and New Zealand and ran it with colleagues here. And we're reporting now what actually we found about that. And we're hoping that that's going to really help people understand their position of where they are, because a lot of the work in this space is either isolated or in the central unit, for example, it can be project work. So it has its tough moments, as Patsy was saying, but this is our sort of latest shift of where we're going. It's not like we're still got the principles and revising and that, but this has sort of been a new contribution. So just to close, so what's my final thoughts? Well, from my perspective, I feel that we need to place ePortfolio pedagogies in a broader conversation. And active learning, experiential learning, authentic assessment, all these things we know about, I think we need to sort of normalise portfolios in a sense to have people understand where it fits and that it's something that they can do. So I guess it's an advocacy tool to put it in that broader conversation to help communicate. I think sometimes, and I know this has been said before, but again, we see it, the technology can be a barrier. So people have tried it and they tell their friends they didn't like it or something like that. So we can have two-way conversation of whether they like it or they don't like it. But we've definitely at our university taken the approach of talking about pedagogies, and we are open. We know other academics in the university are using different platforms to what our enterprise one is. Of course, the problem with that is they don't necessarily get a lot of support, but some people have been happy to go with that with some of the free tools, and we would encourage that because it's really around the pedagogies, not the tool. And the last one, which I've said before, is we need to now take opportunity to engage in what's happening. And we've already done some lovely work around people speaking on Gen AI and how to use that in portfolios. There's been some webinars that have been run this year. And this idea of programmatic approaches to assessments, I think, is going to become quite big in the next few years in the Southern Hemisphere. And perhaps this is something we can discuss at another time, is how could we actually place ePortfolios in that to show them that that is part of the solution. So thank you.
Again, there's been so much richness in terms of what's happened over a period of time. If you're new or if you've only recently been involved in ePortfolio, you might not realise there's so much history within the group and the people that are on the session so far. So certainly, I like that you're an advocate, Christine, and you're a very fantastic advocate and very giving and very collaborative in terms of mentoring others, and that you're also finding that that's mutual and that you're getting lots of benefits by working with others there. And you're a great connection for ePortfolios Australia and ABLE. And there's so much more that I wrote down, but I don't want to take any more time because we're in the last half an hour. We've got 3 presenters. Kate Mitchells is doing hers by recording. She said it should only take 6 minutes. So that means Michael and Bernie, you have 10 minutes each to speed through your long journeys as ePortfolio advocates and practitioners. Thank you, Michael. In 12 minutes, okay. Challenges on.
Well, yeah, that's right. Thank you, everyone. I will try and make this very quick. I know we're running out of time, but I have been involved in ePortfolios for quite some time. Not necessarily in the forum as such, but because I'm a technology enhanced learning person, ePortfolios just naturally become part of that scene. But I am coming to you from Larrakia land up in Charles Darwin University here, and do pay respects to elders both past and present. So just a little bit about this presentation. Lifelong learning is lifelong. So it's not just about the time we're in university, and it's how we fit e-portfolio practice into this notion of being lifelong and our desire to want to actually be representing what we learn, how we learn, where we learn, and things like that. But there are a lot of rest stops along the way, and to rest stops where we can rest and revive. Importantly, one needs to stay on the journey though. So being an e-portfolio advocate means that you are part of that lifelong journey role. So, except the metaphor kind of indicates that there's different forks along the way. And I'll just share in my presentation some of those little forks that have come along my journey. In reality, for me, it's just about multiple pathways and taking these different forks and making the most of those. And they're all perfectly reasonable and all make complete sense. But it's things you don't plan on early on in your career. I suppose the trick in that is to keep agile and purposeful. So just to change up the metaphor a little bit, my portfolio practice started in 1997, and there's been some major milestones along that journey up till today. And so both my ePortfolio and those who've, and for those I use ePortfolio with in my teaching. So even prior to this, though, I was a photographer. So ePortfolio has been part of my, not ePortfolio, but portfolio thinking has been part of my thinking since like I was in the crib, really, because it's always been about sharing my practice and about being able to have people share that practice with you. So back in 1997, I started my first online ePortfolio. That's just from the Wayback Machine, and it breaks up a little bit. But that was a screen grab of my portfolio back in 2003 at the University of Southern Queensland, where at the time we were allowed to just have HTML pages and things like that. And then I started at QUT when I was doing my doctorate, and I started an ePortfolio through the very rudimentary ePortfolio they had associated with for their students. And that evolved, of course, through to the ePortfolio project in 2007. In 2009, I introduced Mahara to the University of Southern Queensland and maintained a Mahara portfolio up until 2022, even though it's still there. It sits there in its kind of state that it was in back in 2022. And that was a great experience to introduce that portfolio with a number of academics within the disciplines, particularly in communications and nursing and education. Worked very closely with those academics to introduce Mahara and ePortfolio thinking into our curriculum. In 2018, I went to Griffith University, and then they were using PebblePad, so I transferred my ePortfolio over to PebblePad, and still maintain a PebblePad instance now, because at CDU we also use PebblePad. But then about 2011, so we are talking now, what, 13 years ago, I was working with a coach, a professional coach, to help you become a better leader and things like that. And one of the things they wanted me to do was set up not an ePortfolio, but a blog site. And so I set up a blog site on not Wikipedia, sorry, on WordPress. And so I started that 2011, and then started thinking, okay, well, maybe I can do other things in this blog site other than just do blogs. And now this has really become my prominent ePortfolio. Now you see here, this is charts the use of those different tools in my practice over that time since 1997, from HTML, the portfolio QT, to Mahara, to PebblePad and WordPress. And you see there's a lot of overlaps. And really where that arrow is down the bottom is where I started to bring WordPress into my main practice, along with PebblePad. So, but for me, it's about having a professional cloud. And around that professional cloud, which is WordPress and my michaelsankey.com site, I keep that as the center of my practice. Around that, we see the thing like we're using SlideShare or Google Slides to introduce things into my press site, my LinkedIn, my ResearchGate, my Uni Research Portal, my Google Scholar, my Instagram, my Flickr accounts, Orchid, all these and YouTube's all kind of feed in. And if you go to those sites, they all point back to my ePortfolio. So the ePortfolio becomes the center of my professional practice. You'll have a different cloud, but what I do with my academics is I try and get them to pinpoint what their cloud is. And with students I primarily work with academics now to get them thinking about ePortfolio so they can do it with their students. But I get them to pinpoint what their cloud is. And so Start Portfolios, there are so many options in terms of what's available to staff now in terms of the electronic tools we have. It's part of an ecosystem of tools that we have at any university nowadays. And it's not necessarily all about learning and teaching, though obviously that's the focus we want to have, but it's also about how our academic staff are using it to help develop their careers and provide that, working towards promotion and things like that. But then, of course, there's this other use for students and the way in which we use it for reflection and work integrated learning and assessment and all the different tools that we can associate with that. Blogging tools and websites and placement tools and shared documents and things like that. So for the student, there's way more options. The trick is that we actually have to work with our staff first to know those options so that we can get the students actually more proficient in those. In many cases, it's about the student working with the academic to help the student create their professional profile. And that needs guidance. And there's things we need to help our academics with along the way, because not every academic wants to do something like that. But now, with the advent of generative AI and things like that, we're starting to see a much more focus back onto ePortfolio. That means our academics need to walk the talk. And that's not easy for them because that wasn't part of their practice when they were learning to be an academic. And it's also them knowing what other professionals do. So if I'm an accounting lecturer, an engineering lecturer, what are the professions doing with these things? How are they representing themselves? Because that's the way in which we need to take our students. So for the primary audience, for students, there are future employers, there's workplace supervisors, there's educators, there's other students, there's the general public. And on the other side, there's a suite of tools. We have an ePortfolio, which has public and private pages. We have LinkedIn, which is very public, of course, and our other social media sites, whether that be X or other particular platforms. And then so it's helping the student and the lecturer first to understand what needs to be private, what needs to be public, what needs to be really public and out there, and what are some of the other roles of social media sites within that. And so it's helping our students emerge into this notion of what it is to be in that e-space as professionals and helping them understand the roles of these different tools that we have in this space. Now, in Australia here, we've had, of course, our Tertiary Education Quality Standards Agency say we need to find new opportunities because AI is causing such a disruption. Back in November, TEQSA released this guidance paper in terms of assessment reform within the age of artificial intelligence. And some new opportunities now exist for ePortfolio, particularly in terms of a systematic and programmatic approach to assessment, which provides multiple means for educators to make judgments about the students' progress. I won't keep reading that because of time, but they are very clear that there is this notion of program-wide assessment, and there's no better tool in my thinking for program-wide assessment than an ePortfolio tool. Then it's, of course, working with our students to understand what should they be representing, what skills should they be promoting out to the world on their billboard. And we can see that's responsibility of the institution. We've seen that it's been the responsibility of the institution to provide this dedicated ePortfolio. But maybe some of those thinkings have started to dissolve a little bit, but I think there's still room for that. We see institutions opting to mediate third-party tools now. One of the institutions I was involved with previously has moved from Mahara to using WordPress for whatever reason. I wasn't involved in that, but there are multiple tools, and we see a number of institutions using multiple tools and supporting multiple tools, as Christine mentioned. but there's still something to be said for the modern ePortfolio platform within our practice. That makes up part of the ecology of the tools that we use at an institution. So it's our ability to host private information and to make viewable to select audiences, as other presenters have shared. And it's often linked through to our learning management system. Funnily enough, when you're out in the workforce, there's very little use of learning management systems. There's very little use of them at schools, but for some reason we bring students into this contrived space called learning management systems. That's another, I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but it's about being able to provide them the ability to have private links, public links, and things like that. It's how we would use them to help students reflect on their learning and to do new forms of assessment, to do group work, which is more nuanced, and to see and to allow teaching staff and other selected people to see certain elements of that as our students start to develop their skills. And of course, that's thanks to the use of things like LTIs, learning technology interoperabilities, and things that allow us to do this, particularly in our Australasian context. So lessons learned, well, and some affordances. Program-wide assessment really lends itself to ePortfolio. Public access to private data and identity theft is becoming a real issue in this space. So we've got to work with our students very closely in terms of what type of information they are making public. Lifetime access to ePortfolio tools does not mean access for lifetime. So I set up my ePortfolio in Mahara. The university stopped using Mahara. They wanted us to, everybody who had been, I'm an alumni, of course, from there too, they wanted us to shift all our practice over to their WordPress. So it doesn't necessarily, once you've set something up, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there forever, even though the institution may say, well, you can have it forever. We're seeing the swapping of tools around at the moment. From, we see that those semi-free tools, the WordPress and the Wix and things like that, that students can get into. And a number of universities are starting to look at those options as well. But we need to work with them in terms of, okay, there is still this notion that there needs to be private and private stuff that people like employees or peers only need to be able to see. So private pages become even more important in this age of generative AI, and more important in the notion of data security. So there are new standards that we need to develop around this to make what is shareable and what isn't shareable, so students have a clear picture of what they can do. The other thing I've learned is that we can't just drag people in kicking and streaming. Some academics just don't want to have a bar of this. The only way we can help them do that is to actually evidence practice ourselves, to work with ePortfolios ourselves. So in all my teams, I try and encourage them to have their own ePortfolios. All my designers, I try and encourage them to have them. They won't all do it. They haven't all done it. But it's the only way they can start to internalize the use of tools like this as they start to use them. Budgets, of course, are getting tighter at universities, and so the support services are strangled a little bit in terms of that. So, but fortunately, the tools themselves are becoming easier to use. And then, of course, it's how we making those links at an institutional level across technology, the policy, the pedagogies, the artifact quality, privacy, all those things, and the teacher workload associated with that. That all complements that whole picture. The other notion is, of course, it's ad-free and it's culturally sensitive. And so they're very important things that we need to consider nowadays. I think that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Well done. And yeah, was it 27 years, Jenny? A long journey. So certainly you're a fantastic advocate for ePortfolio and very generous in terms of sharing your practices and experiences with others. But my main takeaway is that we need to help staff, and you just described that as being the believers, to help them be not only the advocates, but also the mentors of helping students to understand the benefits, not only of creating their ePortfolio for different purposes, but also to manage their identities, which they have multiple of across the internet, to find their cloud, which is gorgeous. So Bernie, I'm going to hand across to you. According to me, we've got about 14. 13 and a half minutes to go, but I'm sure people or the recording can go a little bit longer if we need. But Bernie, let us know if you've got, so Marie Fisher's known more closely to us as Bernie, but Bernie, let us know if you need any help with getting your slides up.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a re-recording of my story. It's a personal journey with ePortfolios. And the title of this presentation is Look in the Mirror and What Do You See? So to start off, I'll introduce myself and say a little bit about my background. So I'm an academic, a writer, historian, and a full-time PhD student at the moment in IT and educational psychology. I've worked in schools, in the vocational education and training sector, and as a university lecturer and teacher, as well as a researcher. I'm still learning. And when I look in the mirror, I see different things, different worlds, different perspectives, and different ways forward. So I'll take you on this very short journey. As I said, it is a re-recording, which is on today, which is the 26th of August on ePortfolio Stories. So as I said in the beginning, I want to share a story which was not about a journey that I was not expecting to go on at all, about the present, the past, and also what I think could be coming in the future. So in the beginning, I was a reluctant user of ePortfolios. When I was studying many decades ago, my teacher training as a secondary school teacher in IT and sciences, I found that reflection was just something I wasn't very good at, or I thought I wasn't very good at. But with practice and with application and with that pause and think and quiet time, I was able to learn to be a reflective practitioner. And ePortfolios enabled this journey and also enabled me to reimagine where I wanted to go with my career, but also how I could help my students. So I started using them over 20 years ago. I used them in study, as I've indicated, and different areas of teaching and learning sectors, and also in IT, information technology areas. The angles of reflection emerged during one particular story from my teaching. And I'll share this first story with you about a Year 7 student I had taught for about 6 months. And she showcased something that was quite extraordinary. So the student reimagined her own life journey and she portrayed it as a fairy tale. And she rewrote a fairy tale which aligned with her particular life story. She illustrated it and she produced it as a video without being asked. So when I set the assignment, which was reimagine your life along the lines of a fairy tale, but obviously with a positive slant if you can, and this is where her journey led her. And I planted a seed, I suppose, for her to explore, and what she came up with was just amazing. So reflection was something that students weren't particularly good at. So that was something I had to scaffold for them. So that was in the beginning. So as you can see, the image here is of a mirror where you can see a few things reflected, but there's probably a lot more to come. So that's the significance of the mirror. But of course, you can take your own journey in that space. So what did I learn through looking in the mirror at different times? Well, if we want to get back to basics, ePortfolios did allow students, teachers and professionals to provide glimpses into their unique worlds. Now, often as teachers, we're so busy with lecturing at university or teaching in the secondary sector and assessing students that we often don't have time for our own research or our own pursuits. And that's something that I was very conscious of as a teacher. The technology hosting systems, or the house, where we house everything, is also important in terms of, how you're going to profile that information. So community engagement, research, teaching and personal pursuits. These were some of the things that I used when I actually engaged with the hosting system Mahara. But before I used Mahara, I developed my own very simple system using the Microsoft Suite. I unexpectedly met a former university student. So this was a couple of years ago. And I was thinking about this because I'd been teaching in university for a few years at the Australian Catholic University at the time. And the student stopped me and said that she thanked me for her introduction to ePortfolios, which I thought was rather interesting because she was a reluctant user. She didn't see the point of them, but she said she'd been able to use it to profile her journey and to show why she was a good fit for the school where she was applying for a promotion. So I found that quite stimulating because it wasn't just a career tool for her. It was telling a story about herself and about the way she perceived and interacted with things, which I thought was interesting. So I thought to myself, she's reflecting on the image that she sees. So at that particular point, she was explaining to me that when she reflects and thinks about reflection, she was just focusing on promotion. But when she stands back, she can see all the segments that contribute to what makes her a good employee or a good fit for that particular area. So that was an interesting take. And as you can see with the image that I've provided here, this isn't my student, by the way, but this is how she may present herself as a professional. She's walking down a corridor and she's looking through various windows or mirrors to show where she's going. So the mirror in the present. So this is a personal story I'll share with you just to show how in realistic terms, ePortfolios may be useful. You may not see that right at the time of a disorienting dilemma, but this was something quite important to me. So my life changed dramatically about 12 months ago when I decided to go full-time to complete my research PhD, and I left paid employment as a university lecturer, which at the time was quite a disorienting dilemma for me, but it was something that I needed to do after some thought and planning, of course. It was really uncomfortable. There were lots of challenges. The mirror was a bit cracked because as I looked into an employment mirror, it wasn't the mirror for me. I needed to move sideways and look into through a different lens or a different perspective. It was cloudy. The mirror was cloudy. It represented the unknown, and for me, a lack of clarity of what would come next. So I accepted what happened to me, that I had to suddenly change my trajectory, and the unexpected happened. I found myself fully engaged in my PhD, reflecting on the way HDR students could develop and maximize the benefits of an e-portfolio while still publishing and engaging in research, making new connections and collaborations. And I became an international chair, unexpectedly, of an education conference at Oxford University in 2023. Something I didn't expect, but it was a very pleasant angle of the mirror, which was now fixed, clear, and motivating for me, all due to ePortfolios, because that's how I got there in the first place. This particular research group in the UK, they first noticed my work when I'd actually written and produced research on ePortfolios and actually demonstrated how portfolios might work. And they provided feedback on my first articles about research into scholarship using ePortfolios, and they encouraged me. And it started a collaboration and also a friendship that has lasted now for at least 13, 14 years. So the unexpected can happen when you least expect it, like surprises that turn into opportunities, but not just opportunities for you, but it could be opportunities to help others as well. So that's my mirror in the present. Now, as we move along. So what have I learned in the present? So a disorienting dilemma initiates changes to your vision, perception, and success, as I've described previously. The uncomfortable change can often reap rewards you can only dream about, maybe not right at the time, but as time goes on. So it is worth accepting those and seeing where they lead. Sometimes, of course, a disorienting dilemma, it's not possible to do that. So I do acknowledge that as well. But for me, when disorienting dilemmas have come along, you pick yourself up and you say, now, what do I need to sidestep and look in this other mirror over to my other side, which could help me think about where I'm going next. So your connections, supporters, family, friends, and colleagues can make a difference to how you reflect. Now, sometimes that's not always positive. Sometimes people do tell you to, you might not want to choose that pathway. But I've been very fortunate in that I was encouraged to follow the pathway that I'm on at the present, and the mirror trajectory, if you like, which is constantly, it's like looking down a corridor and there are different things. Some I can see and some I can't. Reflecting to help others, support those that don't know what they should be doing, and perhaps be a change agent. So that was something I did learn, which I quite enjoyed. So the mirror, so that's the present. So the mirror in the future. So far I've talked to you about the past and some of my experiences, being initially a reluctant user, and I've transitioned to using them all the time for scholarship, as a technology tool, as a way of reflecting, as looking in a mirror, or a technology mirror, if you like. And now we're looking at the future. So when I think about things, reflecting on life, practice, and professionalism, I don't think I would have imagined where I would be now. I would have imagined something quite different. And certainly I didn't imagine my life would be as a paid academic, when I was much younger, decades earlier, because at that stage I had a public sector career, and then I became a teacher, and then I taught in TAFE. So and then university. So I've done many different things. So the reflection on one's life, what you've learned and what you can build upon, is just some of those things I've been thinking about. So emotions, perception, and new learning are just around the corner, but the mirror is not always clear. And I was looking in a mirror this morning, as you do when you're getting ready for work or study, or a bit of both. And I was thinking, now, what am I going to do today, and how am I going to get around it, and what did I do yesterday that I can connect to my learning? Now, we all do this without realizing it. It's like second nature. But I also started thinking about personal reflection. What are the things I want to do to build my personal reflexive practice, if you like, as well? And last night I did some reflection, and I was reflecting on some of the research that I've been doing recently. And I was quite pleasantly surprised that I was in that zone. I was ready to sit down and really clear my mind, and then start opening up to think about what I'd learned from my research and what I needed to do to improve my collaboration. So what I've learned in the present: a disorienting dilemma initiates changes to your vision, perception, and success. Uncomfortable change often reaps rewards you can only dream about. And I gave those examples, moving from a corporate career in IT and business into school teaching, then into TAFE and university, and now back into being a student for a while, but doing academic work, which is really rewarding. Quite an interesting circle that keeps going around, and then every time you go around, like a merry-go-round, if you like, you pick up different things along the way, or different people join the journey. Reflecting to help others, support those who didn't know what to do, and be a change agent. So I like to feel that I'm still able to be a change agent. I'm very happy to help people or mentor people, and this is just something that I've come to accept and take a step back from, and work with people who I wouldn't have imagined I'd been able to work with. So the mirror in the future, well, this is obviously very unclear. I mean, the onset of AI, many people in the stories group who I've joined have talked about their particular organizations. And I must admit, this is more a individual reflective practice story of ePortfolios. I've moved away from the organization because I've written and published in that space many times before, and I'll provide my LinkedIn link in the next, I think it's in the next slide, or the next few slides, so that you can have a look at the research if you are interested. So that's why I haven't focused on that. I've taken an individual hard look through different mirrors at my own practice. The need to think and reflect thoughtfully before one acts or profiles their story will become even more important, especially with regards to privacy in the future, I think. Emotions, perception, and new learning around the corner, but the mirror is not clear. So again, I would emphasize that being yourself, obviously being professional when professional demands it, being able to open up and support other people as needs be, are all important parts of this journey. And as I'm going through milestones, and I probably have had a few milestones, one was putting together, using my ePortfolio to put together parts of my ethics application, where you're pulling out information about your background so that they have a background of a researcher. I found a quick paragraph that I was able to slot in. So that wasn't the only use of the ePortfolios. I've also used it to do some profiling for some, to provide career advice, informal career advice for some people. So I'm still using it in different ways, still using it in corporate ways every day. So we'll just move through. And what have I learned in the present? I've mentioned that. And I will just see if I can find this last slide. Here we go. So here's the last slide. So there's my LinkedIn address for those of you who would like to either join with me, or if you would like to just have a look at some of my research there. That's my main ePortfolio at the moment, and like many others and many of you who I've shared stories with in this particular ePortfolio professional group, I'm constantly adding to that. And my intention is to set up my own website and have one that can be accessed at different times and is a bit more comprehensive, certainly for my needs. Thank you very much for allowing me to re-record my session today. I very much appreciate it because I had some technology issues on the day. So thank you, and I wish you all well in your ePortfolio journeys. Sorry, thank you. Thank you very much.
So well done, Bernie. So what I heard at the beginning, that you were one of those not so fans of ePortfolio practice, but you've had the opportunity to use ePortfolio practice across multiple jobs and institutions, and you've helped to learn lots from others, and also you're very generous in terms of giving back to the ePortfolio community. But you're also shared some really fantastic success stories of your learners and how they're now advocates of the benefits of ePortfolio. And look, the future is anything is possible. Even it sounds like the use of AI as your personal assistant sounds like a wonderful thing. I need one of those. So I'm going to hand across to Christina, who's going to. So look, we do understand we're the 2 hours in now. So if people aren't able to stay on, that's fine. We will continue to record what's left of the session, and you can catch up if it doesn't work for you to hang on the line. But if you can hang on for maybe 10 minutes, we've got a short video and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, I'm Kate Mitchell, and I'm a senior learning designer at the University of Melbourne, specialising in ePortfolios. If you count making zines and keeping sad journals as portfolio practice, then I've been undertaking portfolio practice since I was in my late teens. In my teens, I used journaling to work through my feelings and what I was going to do with my life. I also started my first fanzine focused on alternative music. Around the same time, I was also undertaking media studies and putting together folio-based assessments and starting to consider uni courses in media. All of these things combined set me up for my current career, but also gave me an appreciation for reflection, curation, and portfolio practices. In the early 2000s, as I moved into media production, I was exposed to showreels and websites for creative work. I learned basic HTML and CSS skills. My zine practices became more art and curation based, but also became something I could present or teach to others, even making money as a guest speaker or through delivering workshops. These introduced me to ways of demonstrating my authentic self in media forms and cemented the value of such practices. My paper-based zines became blogs over time as I moved to blogging technologies and digital communities. I suspect my old LiveJournal account is still in the ether somewhere though, now owned by the Russian government. As I've moved into teaching work and learning design work, my portfolio practices have included building physical and digital portfolios for myself, as well as supporting others with portfolio pedagogies and practices. While my original teaching registration portfolio was print-based, I secured my job as a secondary teacher in part based on my digital portfolio, which was ultimately just a lo-fi collection of artifacts and files linked via a simple HTML index page burned onto a CD-ROM. And this was in 2009 or around that time. And I took that with me to interviews. The school that I landed a job with told me that one of the interview panelists was so impressed that they had run off to look at my CD straight after my interview. My love of portfolio practices has continued in my work in universities and communities of practice for well over a decade. From supporting PebblePad in my first role at Victoria University to somehow still supporting PebblePad, among other things, at my current university. Over this time, I've seen the ePortfolio space rise, fall, plateau, and be rediscovered again. We've moved from really simple research on technical implementation or surveying student satisfaction of portfolio technologies to now discussing pedagogical frameworks, design case studies, and issues of ethics, sustainability, and visibility of ePortfolio labour. These are important discussions we need to have in order to mature the space and to move ePortfolios from a niche interest into a mainstream practice. I'm now in a learning design role where I continue to support ePortfolio technologies, but I'm able to take a more strategic level focus. I'm trying where I can to build processes at course, program, and institutional levels for successful ePortfolio implementation. For example, to encourage programmatic design and ePortfolios across the curriculum, and ways to remove pain points for students and staff for an improved experience. Where do I want to go? I really want to see both ePortfolios and learning design as a profession mature and be taken seriously. I think learning designers have a lot to offer in spaces that others don't always recognise. ePortfolios in particular, as a complex pedagogy, often coupled with complex technologies, both needing deep embedded support, could benefit from the expertise of learning designers in a number of ways. For instance, I would love for learning designers to take a more active role employed with technology vendors. There's a lot learning designers can do in terms of bridging the gap between pedagogy, user experience design, product and stakeholder management, and software development to ensure that products like ePortfolio technologies are designed in ways that are contextually driven, pedagogically aligned, while also retaining accessibility, ease of use, and clarity in purpose and design. These roles could be more like hybrid roles between product manager, client, relationship manager, and UX specialist. Learning designers could also be influential as service designers or experience designers within education and within educational institutions, demonstrating and supporting improved student experience as an end-to-end journey. This could be at the programmatic level, both in redesigning curriculum architecture, but also at the institutional level, mapping the whole end-to-end enrolment to graduation process. Working holistically across that end-to-end student journey would allow us not only to implement ePortfolios in ways that are effective and that support deep learning, but also to do the work of deep curriculum alignment for an improved student experience across the board. It would also allow us as institutions to better recognise and support student wellbeing, lifelong learning, and informal learning as part of the holistic learning experience. Those of us who work in ePortfolios are often aware that things not directly part of the curriculum or class will also impact learning. In the interim, I will keep promoting and advocating ePortfolios in the right contexts and to solve the right problems, and continue to build the supports and scaffolds needed to ensure they are successful in practice. I'll also look to incorporate ePortfolios more in my own practice as part of my own continued development and as a way to model good practice and concrete examples for others. Thanks for listening to my story. Feel free to connect with me either on LinkedIn or through other channels.
But just to summarize, Kate is, it sounds like I'm going to call her a tech junkie from a long time ago, or a journaling ePortfolio advocate and user for a long time, both as a teacher, mentor, and supporter of others. And she's starting to see, I think, the early stages, the maturity of ePortfolio practice, but there's still a long way to go in terms of being strategic within an organisation. And that my take of that was that the learning designer could be the actual glue or concrete between a complex practice and a complex technology that hopefully will lead to lifelong learning, both for others, but also in her own experience as well. So we do need to wrap up. If people can hang on, if there's anybody still with us, hang on, I'm just going to wrap up. Patsy, can you give us a quick thank you to those people involved in today's show or webinar, please?
Thanks, Alison, for everything that you do for us in ePortfolios Australia and beyond, like bringing us up to the ABLE conference and so on, and all the webinars that you run throughout the year. Thank you so much. Christina, of course, just a legend in her technical capabilities and her passion for ePortfolios. And all the speakers. I think we've learned a lot today about the journeys, but importantly that it's a process, right? So this is not, you know, a one-off thing. We always develop over time and we learn about ourselves as we go through it. So an interesting capture of all our stories. We love to have our colleagues come together and present together. I think it's important. It shows the collegiality and it also shows that we are alive and kicking and progressing through our ePortfolio journey still. So that's it from me, tuning in from the Dean Hotel lobby with colleagues here. We've had many people come and go, so thank you so much. It's an interesting way of presenting, but hey, we're boundless. This is the way we roll, right? So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
So well done, Patsy. Well done to people in the Dean sitting through the presentation within that foyer. I'm just going to put some links in the chat around some things that are happening with ePortfolios Australia, and I think Christina may have the same for ABLE. But I think it's time that we better wrap up. As Christina says, we've been online probably nearly close to 3 hours, or 3.5 hours, let's say. And so anyway, a long time. So it's time to jump off. But thank you so much for everybody who was able to join us both online, live, and through the recording, and see that there's a long history in the use of ePortfolio both here and in North America, and we will look forward to continuing to connect with everybody in the future. So thank you very much.